Food insecurity remains one of the serious challenges of Uganda and of the serious challenges of Africa. We want to welcome you once again to Joseph Proafrica as we brainstorm, as we share out our views regarding the crisis of food insecurity. We thank you for always sharing, for always liking, for always commenting, and always subscribing to Joseph Proafrica YouTube channel. I want to welcome my brother Timothy Nsubuga, that as we take up this moment, we may be able to share out the ideas regarding food insecurity in Africa.
Hello, people. It's good to be back, and it's always good to have this podium where we basically exchange issues. As he has talked about the topic, food insecurity, we are going to delve into the food insecurity situation in Africa and how it affects the livelihoods of people living in Africa and how it affects economic development and the growth of the society as a whole. Remember, food is a fuel that keeps people moving. So, yeah, we are going to really have a good time, and we hope that you're going to enjoy our conversations. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our videos with the different people out there.
Yes, and it really becomes a pertinent issue, especially at this time when we are expecting a food crisis. We are seeing our brothers and sisters in the biggest part of the country struggling with the high food prices and with the extreme conditions in the Karamoja region, where we are seeing that the situation there is so much tight for the number of people. So it becomes very important to brainstorm about this question. And it has been a while when it was projected last year, 2021, in August, that over 361,000 people would be facing acute food crisis within the Karamoja sub-region. Nearly 6 months later, we see that the crisis is there. We realized that by last year, 2021, November, it was projected that over 66% of the people within the Karamoja sub-region would be having nutrition child deficiencies. But you realize that within 6 months after the survey or after the results were released, people are having the crisis. And that's just one region within Uganda. We're having a number of countries in Africa that are having issues relating to food crisis. And so, my brother, we want to really understand, even besides those regions where we are looking at extreme food crisis situation, there are regions even where we are seeing that accessing a meal is one of the biggest challenges. Obviously, that's on top of the fact that generally in Africa, few families can afford 3 meals a day. But then you realize that there are even situations when it's acute. So probably as we break into the issue, I would like maybe to hear from my brother Timothy about the leading causes of such a crisis within Uganda and within Africa.
If you look at the food crisis situation, it's not only an African crisis, I would say.
Yes.
Actually, the world is undergoing a global food crisis. But if you look at Africa as a whole, we have, I would say, a situation which is really dangerous. Remember that food is one of the essential things needed for human survival. So, if you look at the one of the causes of food crises in Africa, we have insecurity.
Yes.
Insecurity. This is in the form of war, civil war. Then we have also changes in the geopolitical sphere. If you look on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, it also contributes to this. We also have to look at the bad climate. Some places have climate that is not really suitable for agriculture and farming, and we have to look at the fact that people have left the how African societies were. I wouldn't say okay specialized, where we have the hunters,
Yes.
the warriors, and then the farmers. But you find out that this farming, which is supposed to be one of the key sites or the key components that are supposed to keep African societies moving, has
Yes.
greatly been abandoned. And you find out that the people who basically carry out farming are mostly old people, not young people. So
The young people have run to the cities.
they have run to the offices, and they do not actually think about going to dig and, let me say, plow, farm the land. And you have also to look into the circumstances of let's say, if you look at the calamities we have, if you
Yes.
look at things like mudslides, floods, the droughts, it all comes into place. And not forgetting the COVID-19 pandemic, which has also been one of the factors that have led to this crisis. So basically, the food crisis in Africa has been predominant. Mm. Africa is supposed to be the bread basket of the world. We have the perfect climate, but why aren't we using it? You find out that, okay, it's a collection of
Of
various
various
factors
factors.
that lead to this, but mostly our climate is suitable for agriculture. But you find out that in Africa you have food crisis, which is I wouldn't say laughable, but an interesting scenario which shocks me at times. Because if you quote the words of the president of Uganda, Uganda alone has enough food to feed its own people. But how can we say we have a food crisis in regions? So I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done to try to remove these situations of food crisis out of the what out of the
Of the
picture.
country.
Yeah.
I tend to feel that actually, from the different causes that you have really mentioned, a number of factors actually need to be given consideration. Like when you talk of the manpower that is now into agriculture, I think it's one thing. Why? You realize that society is dynamic and different.
Yeah.
Society evolves over time. In the past, we were having the communities
Mm.
where they were passing on survival values. Like a boy grew knowing that I have to build a house, I have to do this, I have to do this, and I have to provide for a home. The girls grew knowing their roles also in society. However, we are looking at a society where children are just growing from nursery school, they are going to the primary school, they are going to the secondary school. The parents are not involving them into production. So these people are growing without knowing the roles of production. And then at the end of the day, you graduate from school, it's fine, it's good to study. But then if you don't get that office job,
Mm.
you will get these young people hanging around. They are there, they are eating, they are surviving, but meanwhile, they are not into production. And when we see that in Africa and maybe in Uganda, over 80% of the people are depending on agriculture, whether you're into the garden or else you are buying agro-based
Agro-based
products.
products.
So ideally, the biggest population is depending on agriculture because we are not into industrial, we are not into mining. So you realize that it's the backbone of Africa, it's the backbone of Uganda. But at the end of the day, the biggest population is shunning away from agriculture. So I think that's one of the issues that needs to be revisited. But however, even when we are revisiting such an issue, we need to realize that society has evolved. So the other question then comes to how do we get back the young people into agriculture? Because we need agriculture, but the young people are exiting from agriculture because of the different challenges. So would we have to empower the old people who are into agriculture, or we need means that can pull down the young people to embrace agriculture?
So I would say, okay, basically I'm from a farmer-based family. My parents are farmers, so
Yes.
I know the peculiarities and the dynamics involved in growing crops, rearing of animals, and all the rest. So if you look at this into perspectives, by the way, do you know that we have kids who know that food comes from the fridge? They don't know how it even comes about. So
Yeah.
that's a scary scenario in that the young children think that if you want to get food,
You go
you
to
go
the
to the fridge
fridge.
or the supermarket. So which is really scary because if people forget the dynamics of how food is gotten, how are we sure that they are going to be able to
Get
use
into
the arable
production.
land to get food? So number one, if you look at this into perspective, I think what can be done to change mindsets is through, I don't know, we need to use the means we have, technology. You see, there are countries on this planet that are really shocking. That you wonder, how are they doing this? You know, they say necessity is the mother of innovation,
Yes.
but I tell you, I kind of laugh when I find out that we are not using what we have to get to put us at a certain point. As somebody said that what is given will be asked at some point. Like if you're given too much,
Yes,
you'll be
yes,
asked
yes.
a lot of
Yeah, it's
questions at
even
a
it's
certain
even
point.
there in the Bible. To
Yeah.
whom much is given, much will be asked.
Yeah,
Yes.
so if you look at this into context, looking at the agriculture context in Africa, I think there is need for more measures, especially if you look at the young generation. I think if you look at we it has to look, you have to look at it from point of the syllabus of what is taught in schools. You know that most children do not look at agriculture as something serious, but agriculture is one of the things that keeps the country moving, and it's one of the things that provides gets the country money, in this case Uganda. So basically what I think is for the government to strengthen the education system, in which they should teach children like not to pass exams for sense, because I think the way we do things is basically to pass exams, but we need to look at it as a way of life. Like if you look at the pre-African societies, like how are people taught?
Obviously, they were taught through practice, like you go, if I'm the father and we are going to the garden and you are a son, we go together.
You go to the
Hands on.
hands on.
Yes.
But if you look at if you look at agriculture, people are using it to I remember I never did agriculture in high school, but what I
Yes.
know is kids do it to pass
Yes.
because they think it's easy. But they are not put into this scenario that agriculture is something so valuable and something so important. Because let me say, if you have a generation where kids know that, yeah, agriculture is one of the backbones of the country, so we need to take active interests in this project, okay, in this venture, because we know that it's going to enable us to have a sustainable amount of food flowing within the country, and in the long run have we can even export food, okay, export in large amounts. But I think it has to come from a point of government policy. So if we take this into context, I think if the government strengthens its policies towards the agriculture sector, and most especially towards the education from the youth going to the youth, especially the youth, letting them know how agriculture is important. Even if you look at Uganda, we have to thank the government, by the way, because if you look at the NADS project,
Yes.
the NADS project, as for say, has helped most people in Uganda to realize the importance of agriculture, but I believe that more effort needs to be put into such projects. If we have if you have a myriad of projects like NADS, teaching people or supporting farmers or basically expanding the agricultural practice in Uganda, I think we won't have food crises. But basically, if you're looking at the food crises in Uganda, I think it has to do with an issue of anticipatory measures. Because if you look, I'm a student of public relations, so in crisis management they talk about anticipatory. You have to anticipate a scenario that's supposed to come. You do not just wake up one morning and say, "Wow, we have a food crisis here," but what have we done on ground?
Yeah,
So I think,
and actually, I tend to feel that there is a key point because
mm,
by last year, 2021, in November, research established that over 361,000 people
mm,
would go hungry in Karamoja sub-region,
mm,
within the districts of Kotido and around. 6 months later, the food crisis is there. But already there was evidence to prove this. Were there measures taken? Were there measures taken? So it becomes actually very important that the government has a key role to play. And with the role of government, it cannot be underestimated because it is key into sensitization. And when you're submitting, especially relating to sensitization, I got to remember that a number of banks, when they are usually advertising these agriculture loans, they will always run their adverts, they will always make flyers and posters with these men in their 60s. So if they are looking at an agriculture loan, they will put there some woman in a Gomez or some old man with usually they are beginning to age with some countable gray hair. So if I'm a young person and I'm looking at such an advert, I will tend to assume that usually people have to get into agriculture when they are retiring or when they are old.
That's the point. And we think that agriculture is for the retired people, but we forget that this is something important. Let me say, for example, if you get land let me say you have something like 50 acres of land, what are you going to do with them? The first thing that will come in my mind, create a nice farm.
Yes.
Plant my crops, do something with that land. But if we say agriculture is for the retired people, then what's the point?
So it then becomes important. There is need for efforts into sensitization, but also we need to see that governments need to help people prepare for such situations. Because, for example, when we're having a climate change crisis, when we're having the COVID pandemic, and this is an outbreak that is going to affect nearly all the people, it's affecting because people are depending on rain-fed agriculture, meaning the whole village or the whole region will not be able to find solutions to that. Then at the end of the day, the civil society organizations and then the government, the line ministries, have a role to bring up interventions that are going to help people come out of this crisis. Because it's not like one person is less and they're unable to produce, that's why they're having food challenges with their household. This is just a general challenge.
Yeah.
It's a drought, people are unable to produce. There is COVID, people are unable to produce, or the high prices of the
Food.
materials they
Yeah.
need for planting and production of food. So it becomes important that there is need for government interventions. And then also the youth to get into agriculture. I think that is something that really needs attention, because we are having over 70% of Uganda's population, or even Africa, being within the age of the youth or being a youth. However, when we say that the biggest population is the youth population, yet at the same time they are not into agriculture. Ideally, they are not into production, because they are hanging around, they are roaming around the towns and small urban centers. You're not sure of what they are doing, but ideally, they are not into production, because they are into rendering services for wages that are paying them as little as 5,000, 10,000 per day. And so they are working hand to mouth. There is no production at the end of the day. So it becomes hard to address the question of food insecurity in Africa or food insecurity in Uganda. But then, besides looking at the governments and the NGOs within the civil society sector, what can be the role of each and every person, say a youth, into the fight against the food insecurity?
I believe in the long run we should look at having food silos.
Yes.
Food silos, meaning that in case of crises, like let's say Karamoja, they can send like 100 or 1,000 trucks to go take food to those people. So if you look at that, okay, it kind of panned out in COVID-19, where they were giving food to the less fortunate part of the society. But we need to look at this in the longer run, because food is security itself.
Yes.
If you look at it in a more strategic sense. So I believe that the government should now strengthen its measures regarding food. That they should, I don't know if they can create 1,000 silos. I don't know if I may not know the dynamics of how that comes up, but if they can have like silos whereby, let me say, if we have bumper harvests, we can store some food to prepare for a rainy day. If you look at in the Bible, in the story of Joseph, Genesis, when he went to Egypt, that dream of 7 years of famine and 7 years of prosperity. So, what did Joseph do to prepare the Egyptians? Joseph created a system whereby they were able to use their arable land to grow food, and the food they harvested, and they had the bumper harvest, they stored in granaries, or what they call modern day silos. So sometimes the reason why I'm referring to the Bible, it's because the Bible is a place of vast knowledge that we can actually pick and apply in our daily life. So if you look at that, that saved Egypt and the family of Joseph from famine. So we have to have a model like that, that we do not need to wake up one morning and we say, oh my God, we have a famine here. Oh my God, we have a crisis here. So we need to take food.
I think as it comes to preparedness, you remind me of a scenario. It must have been 2018,
Yes.
Towards its end. There was a bumper harvest of maize,
Yeah.
especially in the eastern region, where districts like Iganga were having lots of maize. That all of a sudden, the price of maize dropped from 1,000 per kilogram to 200 shillings per kilogram. But among the reasons that were cited out is that much of our maize was being exported to Kenya. However, at that time it overrained in Kenya, and they also cultivated and they got much maize. So they couldn't take up our maize. And there were suggestions, there were interventions suggesting like, yeah, let the government buy this maize at least from the farmers at 500 shillings instead of the farmers selling it to these people who are going to export it at 200 shillings. But however, these were all talks, were at the floor. They were not really actualized. And they were looking at a situation of buying up this maize, storing it in silos, and then selling it to the people at the end of the day when there is a food crisis. However, that wasn't implemented. So usually when we are having a bumper harvest, you realize that the farmers will be affected. these people who are going to export the food crops will come and declare a drop in the prices. They buy at low prices because they know farmers have no storage systems. Somebody is there, is still sleeping in a hut with his whole family. They are unable to store 10 sacks of maize. I'm using maize because it's one of the things you can easily preserve. You may not easily preserve matoke within our context. Maybe you have in cassava and you've harvested, you've dried it, but you don't have where to store it. Even when you store it, it will get destroyed by weevils.
Very much so.
So you realize that farmers need to be supported.
Yeah.
They really need to be supported in improving on the production means, improving on the way they process the food, improving on the way they store the food, but also improving on the way they market it. Because imagine someone just waking up, obviously, usually even when there are different buyers of maize within the villages, at the end of the day, that maize will be collected and it will be exported through one channel or through two people's hands.
Yeah.
Because not everybody has the capacity to export this food. So meanwhile, these two hands are exporting the food. These three people are exporting the food. The country runs into a food crisis. So I think that calls for government intervention within that. How do we help the farmers to preserve the food? How do we help the farmers to keep this food within the community instead of it being bought at cheap prices when there is a bumper harvest? And in times of crisis, people are languishing. So that really calls for government interventions. But then we need to keep appealing to policymakers. We need to keep making a wake-up call to everyone. Because not until everyone realizes that there is a problem that needs to be addressed, that will remain a very big challenge for Africa. And in families where we are having food crisis, you can never kick out poverty out of such a household. As long as you're having food insecurity within a household, because when we say there is food insecurity, even the general security will become a problem. Because when there is food insecurity, there is going to be poverty. When there is poverty, domestic violence is going to erupt. When domestic violence erupts, crime will increase. Because the youth can't survive, they will go and steal, they will go and rob. Today they are into somebody's
insecurity in the country.
The insecurity obviously becomes automatic.
So to look at we are supposed to talk about what the youth can do.
Yes.
To
address.
Change. No. We need actually I basically call it flip the script. We need to flip the script as the youth because let me say with the world we live in today, we think it's all about Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, and all that stuff. But at times, we really need to care about what we can do best. And yeah, thank God we have this technology. Really good, really perfect stuff. But how do we use this technology to better ourselves? So, I think I was watching CGTN. CGTN. So, I was looking how Chinese farmers are using technology apps to help better their crop production. Let's say people think that, okay, yes, we cannot reach that level of mechanized farming.
Yes.
Because by the nature and state of the people living in the country, but we can begin slowly by slowly, because I think that if, let me say, the youth change their perspective towards agriculture and they take part, because I have very many friends of mine who tell me they're into poultry, others tell me they're into piggery. I'm like, wow, you guys are doing something great. But imagine if you have a whole, let me say, we are around 45 million. Imagine if you have roughly 25 million youths practicing agriculture, whether planting onions, whether planting maize, whether rearing chicken and what. I think that will change the whole dynamics. But I think that will have to come with a support system. Even beggars would ride.
Yeah,
so
true.
we're just looking at hypothetical scenarios in a sense that if these things are put in place, maybe or somehow
the situation will become
can turn better. So that's what we are trying to look at. But I think even if we give these hypothetical scenarios and hypothetical suggestions, maybe they can impact the current policies put in place, and we can have a game-changing agriculture system in Uganda. So, back in my submission, I talked about the Russo-Ukraine conflict. Now, you see, hey, somebody said that everything in this world is connected.
Yeah.
So what happens in the east and west affects us here. So you know how it affects our farming process?
Yes, it
Fertilizers. Fertilizers. And how fertilizers made? Natural gas. So with this Russo-Ukraine conflict and all the war, the fighting, the firebombing going on, you find out that Africa is basically affected. That's why we had the Secretary General of African Union, who doubles as the Prime Minister of Senegal, Macky Sall, going to the Kremlin to meet Vladimirovich Putin to try to find a solution in that African countries cannot have to suffer the wrath of a food crisis, because we saw what happened in Egypt, we saw what happened in Egypt related to rising food prices.
Yes.
But look at this in this perspective. The Russo-Ukraine conflict has affected the entire face of the global community, most especially Africa. And you find out that here in Uganda, even fertilizer prices have gone up the
They
roof.
have gone high.
So,
There is a need to start to integrate the geopolitics and how it really affects. Does this come to a question of scholarship, like as in adding more effort into studying the role of geopolitics into food insecurity? Because at the end of the day, you as an individual, how do you play a role in affecting the geopolitics of Africa? Because we are looking at now how politics is playing within the geographical areas to determine nearly the entire lifestyle and all the spheres within the lives of the people.
yeah,
So how can we look at the geopolitics and how it affects does it get back to policy? Does it get back to government? How can someone, a youth somewhere there or an elder somewhere there, have a hand to put into the way geopolitics is going to affect food production in Africa?
food production in Africa? I think with geopolitics, you have to leave it to the professionals in the foreign service. So
We shall leave it to the to the
we
generals.
shall leave it to His Excellency President Museveni and that entire diplomatic team of Uganda
Yes.
and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
By that becomes important that we need to see how also geopolitics is going to affect the food production, and maybe the government can come up with interventions to address the question of geopolitics and how it's going to affect the food production within Uganda and within Africa as a whole.
So I think we need to just have a looking glass
Okay.
where we plan 10 steps ahead and try
Okay.
to come up with measures for uncertain scenarios, because let me say geopolitics is something that is at some point predictable because of the flow of events, or it
Yes.
follow each other. There is no shortcut here and there, but at times there are things that happen that are out of our control, even our government in a sense cannot control. So if you look at basically Russia-Ukraine, because Russia is the biggest exporter of wheat, Ukraine also gives much wheat to the world. And if you look at the amount of wheat that is stored at the port of Odessa, there is a lot of wheat. Odessa, Mykolaiv region. So there is also that. And if you have to look at Belarus, which is also a big fertilizer producer. So I would say that it all has to fall into what our government plays, man.
Okay.
If they are going, they can do shuttle diplomacy. Maybe it can help. Maybe say Uganda to get the fertilizers they need. But even if you look at the current crop that is going, the current political scenario, the current geopolitical scene, you find out that even the United States, realizing that the impact of the economic war of attrition, the sanctions policy, they have decided to I think to reduce sanctions on basically food and fertilizer production, meaning that sooner or later that maybe or somehow if the fertilizers get into the market, the Russian fertilizers, the Ukraine fertilizers or Belarus fertilizers, maybe we might have a little bit of calm down
Relief
on whatever on the
food crisis,
on the
because
food
at least
on
the
the food
production will
crisis.
get higher.
But you see, it doesn't mean that if that happens, even if Gutierrez, the UN Secretary General, and Erdogan or anybody in the Kremlin or the Washington do their part and enable things to get back to a normal subtle ground,
It will be automatic that all countries will have the problem solved.
No,
it will come back to the
we have
local
to-
governments in every country to see how to integrate these solutions.
So we have to look further. What can we do? So that means we have to develop our fertilizer industry. Because man, fool me once, cool. Fool me twice, fool me 3 times, no, I can't accept to be fooled 3 times. So what we need to do is that we need to develop our organic manure industry or fertilizer industry. If we do that, maybe we can have a scapegoat, or we can have leeway that can prevent us from having a situation where farmers are supposed to buy fertilizers at high prices, meaning that they are going to sell their produce
at a very high price at the end of the day.
at the end of
I've
that
just
day.
seen it with these people who are doing poultry.
Mm,
Today you go to buy eggs, they tell you the tray is at 90,000. Next
mm.
week you go back, they are like, no, the prices of feeds went so high. The tray of eggs is at 10,000. Then you go back after next week, they are like, no, the prices of feeds went so high. It's now 11,000, depending also on where you buy your eggs
So
from. Also,
as
it varies. So it will becomes a big challenge, and it calls for the intervention of the government. But however, we still need to see how we keep sensitizing the people, because when we sensitizing a generation, when everybody is concerned about the problem that is at hand, I think at a point people will be informed, and when there is a chance for people to contribute, they'll be able to contribute. It's the reason we keep reaching out, sharing out this information with you, picking your views, and so you can always have your views within our comment section. That together you can even actually recommend the next topic that you probably need to have with us, because we need to see how we bring all these ideas together, because at one day, one time, they can influence policy. And if they influence policy, then we can have solutions to the challenges that we are facing in Africa. But that has been our moment.